joyful and sing. Jesus is coming again. Echo with hilltops, proclaim it, declare, Jesus is coming again. Coming in glory, the Lamb that was slain. Jesus is coming again. Coming again, coming again. Jesus is coming again.
Okay. You are welcome to Daniel's prophecy seminars. It's going to be a systematic study of the book of Daniel. And our approach will be questions and answers. We're going to have 10 modules all together. Module 1 is general introduction to the book of Daniel. Module 2, the education of Daniel and his companions. Module 3, Nebuchadnezzar's dream of a great image. Module 4, deliverance of Daniel's companions from the fiery furnace. Module 5, Nebuchadnezzar's second dream, humiliation and restoration. Module 6 is the fall of Babylon, the ancient and the modern. Module 7, Daniel's deliverance from the den of lions. Module 8 is Daniel's second prophetic vision. Module 9 is Daniel's third prophetic vision. And then Module 10 is Daniel's fourth prophetic vision. We will begin now with Daniel Prophecy Seminar Module 1, which again is titled General Introduction to the book of Daniel. Our objective in this module is to give the reader of Daniel a preview of the entire book by leading him or her through the broad outlines of the entire prophecy. Now, we will ask questions, then go into the scriptures for answers, and then have a brief explanation. That will be our approach all through. The first question we ask is this: why is the book of Daniel simply titled Daniel? Now in the book of Daniel chapter 8 verse 1, we have a testimony. It says, in the 3rd year of the reign of Belshazzar the king, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, subsequent to the one which appeared to me previously. The one writing to us is Daniel. Therefore, the book is named after its principal character in accordance with the practice of the Old Testament books, which name the books after their main heroes. So here the main hero in the book of Daniel is Daniel. Just like other books of the Bible, like Joshua, Esther, Samuel, and Job, and a number of others. Now let's take our second question. Who is the author of the book of Daniel? Of course, Daniel 8 verse 1 tells us Daniel was the presenter, and further again in the book of Matthew chapter 24 verse 15, Jesus gives us a testimony about the author of the book of Daniel. Matthew 24 verse 15 says, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, say, whosoever reads, let him understand. So we can conclude here that the author of the book of Daniel is Daniel, just like the book itself has a testimony to that, And Christ himself also made a reference to the book of Daniel as being authored by the man Daniel. Now, what is the central theme of the book of Daniel? In Daniel chapter 4, verse 17, we read, "This decision is by the decree of the watchers and is sent by the word of the holy ones, in order that the living may know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men, gives it to whomever he will, and sets over it the lowest of men." Therefore, we can say that the central theme of the book of Daniel might be called the handbook of history and predictive prophecy. Predictive prophecy is a preview of history, whereas history is predictive prophecy in review. And let's make progress. Traditional view of the Jews and Christians is that the book of Daniel was written by Daniel. And on this book, of course, we said it based on some points. One is the claim of the book itself, as we have in Daniel chapter 8, verse 1. And then we must also remember that the author must be well acquainted with the history, as only a man of that century, that is 6th century, like Daniel, could present a very vivid history of the time. Of course, Christ's own testimony is something that we have to reckon with, as in the book of Matthew 24, verse 15. Now, what are the two main divisions of the book of Daniel? We note there are two main divisions of the book of Daniel. The first division is history, that covers Daniel chapters 1 through 6. And the second division is predictive prophecy, covering Daniel chapters 7 to 12. Those are the two divisions. Now let's see the historical section to begin with. What does the historical section reveal to any reader of the book of Daniel? Now you remember we read Daniel chapter 4, verse 17, which says that the decision is by the decree of the watchers and is sent by the word of the holy ones, in order that the living may know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men, gives it to whomever he will, and sets it over the lowest of men. Therefore, we can deduce that the historical section reveals the true philosophy of history, standing as a preface to the prophetic section, and provides a detailed account of God dealing with a nation. That nation is Babylon, and enables us to understand the meaning of the rise and fall of nations as outlined in the prophetic portion of the book. Therefore, the book of Daniel reveals the role of Babylon in the divine plan and the roles of the other nations that succeeded Babylon in the prophetic screen. Now, let's make progress. How does the historical section present Daniel as God's ambassador to the Gentile king Nebuchadnezzar? Now we'll look at Ezekiel chapter 31, verse 11. It reads, "Therefore I will deliver into the hand of the mighty one of the nations, and it shall surely deal with it. I have driven it out for her wickedness." Further also in the book of Jeremiah chapter 27, verse 6, we read, "And now I have given all these lands into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, my servant, and the beasts of the field I have also given to serve him." You can see clearly that Daniel was presented as God's ambassador, and his duty was to give the king Nebuchadnezzar an opportunity to know Daniel's God as the arbiter of history and to cooperate with him. Nebuchadnezzar not only was a monarch of the greatest nation of the time, but was in fact the one whom God had chosen as eminently wise and had a sense of justice, and the Lord decided to use him. You know, in Ezekiel 31 verse 11 it says that God raised him to power as to play a role in the divine plans. It is written, "Now I have given all these lands into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar the king, my servant." So God desired that as the Jews went into captivity, that they will be held under a hand, and that was so firm without being cruel. That hand is Nebuchadnezzar. Now, what was Daniel's mission at the court of a king? In Daniel chapter 1, verses 1 to 7, we discover Daniel's mission there, of course, together with his friends. It reads, "In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with some of the articles of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God. And he brought the articles into the treasure house of his God. Then the king instructed Adphanas, the master of his eunuchs, to bring some of the children of Israel, some of the king's descendants, and some of the nobles, young men in whom there was no blemish, but good-looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge and quick to understand, who had the ability to serve the king's palace, whom you might teach the language and literature of the Chaldeans." Verse 5 says, "And the king appointed for them a daily provision of the king's delicacies, and of the wine which he drank, and 3 years of training for them, so that at the end of that time they might serve before the king. Now from among those of the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. To them the king, the chief of the eunuchs, gave names. He gave Daniel the name Belteshazzar, and to Hananiah, Shadrach, and to Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego." Now we can see clearly that Daniel's mission at the king's court was to secure the submission of a king's will to the will of God, in order that the divine purpose might be fulfilled. Now, how did God achieve his purpose through Babylon? We see through the entire chapters of 1, 2, 3, 4, as well as Daniel chapter 6, verses 3 and 4, that God worked in miraculous ways as to achieve a purpose. Now, precisely in Daniel chapter 6, verses 3 and 4, we read, "Then did Daniel distinguish himself above the governors and satraps, because an excellent spirit was found in him, and the king gave thought to setting him above the whole realm." Verse 4 says, "So the governors and satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find no charge or fault, because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault in him." So I see clearly that Daniel chapter 4 a narration of the means by which God secured the allegiance of the king Nebuchadnezzar. You know, first and foremost, God needed a man who would be a fitting representative of the policies of heaven at the king's court. So he chose Daniel as his ambassador, to this king Nebuchadnezzar. We also notice that God used captivity to bring Daniel and to a favorable attention of Nebuchadnezzar. You can see that in Daniel chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. And then he gave the king dreams to make him have confidence in Daniel, and then later in Daniel's God. You can see clearly that what we see in the entire books of Daniel, chapters 1 to 4, are clear as to the manner in which God uses men today to accomplish His will on earth. God could use Daniel because he was a man of principle, a man of sterling character, a man of whose business in life was to do the will of God. Now, in what ways did Daniel cooperate with God in fulfilling his mission in the king's court? In Daniel chapter 1, verse 8, we read, "But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself." Further, in Daniel chapter 6, verse 3, we read, "Then did Daniel distinguish himself above the governors, etc., because an excellent spirit was found in him, and the king gave thought to setting him over all the realm." Dear listeners and viewers, see that Daniel proposed in his heart to live in harmony with all the revealed will of God. Therefore, God brought him into favor with the officials of the kingdom of Babylon. That was how he cooperated with God, and his mission was accomplished. How did the determination of Daniel and his friends pave way for God to make them excel physically? In Daniel chapter 1, verse 6, we read, Daniel chapter 1, verses 12 to 16, we read, Daniel says, "Please test your servant for 10 days, and let them give us vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance be examined before you, and the appearance of the young men who eat the portion of the king's delicacies. And as you see fit, so deal with their servants." So he consented with them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. And at the end of 10 days, their features appeared better and fatter in flesh than all the young men who ate the portion of the king's delicacies. You can see clearly that the determination of Daniel and his friends to live for God and according to the will of God paved way for God himself to demonstrate their physical superiority over their colleagues. They turned out to be 10 times better than their colleagues. How did God further give Daniel and his friends intellectual superiority over their colleagues to the praise of his own name? If we read further in verse 16, it said, "God the steward took away their portion of delicacies and the wine that they were to drink, and gave them vegetables." Verse 17 says, "And for these 4 young men, God gave them knowledge and skill in literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams." So God followed up the physical superiority by granting Daniel and his friends intellectual superiority also above their colleagues. Verse 17 said, "God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom." And the result was that they were considered 10 times better than their closest competitors. Hence, in personality, in physique, and intellect, Daniel and his friends proved to be remarkably superior to their fellow men, and thereby won the confidence and respect of the king Nebuchadnezzar. Now, through what a series of dramatic experiences did God prepare Nebuchadnezzar to meet and honor Daniel's God? We see in Daniel chapter 2, chapter 3, and chapter 4 a series of dramatic events. Beginning with Daniel chapter 2, where we have the dream of this great image that the king Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and when the day broke, he forgot the dream, and he called upon his wise men to tell him the dream and his image. And when they failed to do so, he called upon Daniel, who told him the dream and the meanings. And so that brought attention of the king to Daniel. And further also in Daniel chapter 3, you see the drama of the fiery furnace. When Daniel's companions, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, refused to worship the great image which the king set up, they were sentenced to be destroyed in the fiery furnace. But God again intervened in a miraculous way, and they were delivered. That again brought the attention of the king to the Hebrew boys and to the God of the Hebrews. Further also in Daniel chapter 4, where we have the dream of a great tree, which eventually represented the king Nebuchadnezzar. That tree was cut down, and eventually Nebuchadnezzar was shown that at the end of the day, God alone was the one who deserved worship. Can see through all these series of experiences, God prepared Nebuchadnezzar to honor Daniel and honor the God of Daniel. Now we move further. How did God bring Nebuchadnezzar to progressive submission? Through the dream of a great image. In all this we are paraphrasing now. We are eventually going to study in greater detail when we get into the later modules of the Daniel's prophecy seminar. Now, how did God actually bring Nebuchadnezzar into a submission through the dream? Daniel chapter 2, verse 47 says, the king answered Daniel and said, truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets. Since you could reveal this secret, the inferiority of human knowledge exhibited in the experience of Daniel chapter 2 actually led the king to admit that Daniel of a truth, God, the God of Daniel, was the God of gods and the Lord of kings and the revealer of secrets. And he freely acknowledged that the wisdom of God and the superiority of God, not only was it superior to human wisdom, but was also superior to the wisdom of the little gods of the kingdom of Babylon. Now, what is the next way that God brought Nebuchadnezzar into submission? We see more details in Daniel chapter 3, precisely verses 28 and 29. It reads, Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants, who trusted him, and they have frustrated the king's word, and yielded their bodies, that they should not serve nor worship any god, except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses be made as heap and as sheep, because there is no other God who can deliver like this. Hallelujah. Incident of the fiery furnace in chapter 3 led the king Nebuchadnezzar to actually admit that the God of heaven is so great that no one can deliver his servant just like he does. And he concluded that no one in his realm shall speak anything against the God of Daniel. In what way did God bring Nebuchadnezzar into submission? In Daniel chapter 4. When you read Daniel chapter 4, verses 32 and 37, it says, "And they shall drive you from me, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. They shall make you eat grass like oxen, and 7 times shall pass over you, until you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men, and gives it to whomever he chooses." Verse 37 says, "Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all of whose works are truth and whose ways are justice, and those who walk in pride he is able to put down." We see clearly that Daniel chapter 4 presents 7 years during which Nebuchadnezzar's vaunted wisdom and power were removed temporarily from him. This experience taught him that not only that the Most High is wise, but that he's so powerful and will exercise his wisdom and power in human affairs. Indeed, God has wisdom. He has power, he has authority. And whoever exalts himself, he will abase. And those who humble themselves, he will lift up. Now, how did evil befall Nebuchadnezzar's successor for failing to learn from the father's experience? In Daniel chapter 5, verse 22, we read the experience of Belshazzar, a grandson to Nebuchadnezzar. It says, "But you, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, although you knew all this, and you have lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven. They have brought the vessels of his wrath before you, and you and your lords, your wives, and your concubines have drunken wine from them, and you have praised the gods of silver and gold, bronze and iron, wood and stone, we do not see or hear or know, and the God who holds your breath in his hand and owns your ways, you have not glorified. Then the fingers of the hand were sent from him, and this writing was written. And this is the inscription that was written, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. This is the interpretation of each word, Mene. God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. Tekel, you have been weighed in balances and found wanting. Peres, your kingdom have been divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. So Daniel chapter 5 reveals, regrettably, that the lessons Nebuchadnezzar personally learned over a period of many years largely failed to benefit those who succeeded him upon the throne. An example is Belshazzar, the last ruler of Babylon, who openly defied the God of heaven, in spite of the fact that he was acquainted with the experiences of his grandfather Nebuchadnezzar. Instead of working in harmony with a divine plan, Babylon became a proud and cruel oppressor, and in rejection of the principles of heaven, wrought its own ruin. The nation was weighed and found wanted, and its world dominion passed to the Medes and the Persians. Now, how did God further express his wisdom, power, and authority to the successful kingdoms of Media and Persia? Daniel chapter 6, verses 20 to 23 gives us a clue. It says that when he came to the day, he cried with a lamenting voice to Daniel. The king spoke, saying to Daniel, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to deliver you from the lions?" Then Daniel said to the king, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lion's mouth, so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. And also, O king, I have done no wrong before you. Now the king was exceedingly glad for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel out of the den. So Daniel was taken out of the den, and no injury whatsoever was found on him, because he believed in his God. Now the great controversy once again played out itself in the spirit of Daniel, as we have here in the story. The forces of evil gang together against the forces of good, and it would appear that they prevailed temporarily, or eventually God prevailed on the side of Daniel his servant. Now, in delivering Daniel from the lion's den, God demonstrated his power and authority before the rulers of the Persian Empire, and that he had done previously in the days of Babylon. In the opposition against Daniel by his colleagues, how did God again show his superiority as a living God? This is in Daniel chapter 6, the story of Daniel being cast into the lion's den. Daniel chapter 6 verses 26 to 28 reads, I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is a living God, and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure to the end. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who had delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So finally, an edict was made by the king of the Medes, and acknowledging that the living God reigned in the affairs of men. And he admitted that he is steadfast forever, and even the law of the Medes and the Persians, which altered not, was obliged to yield the laws of heaven. Amen. Now let's look at the predictive section of the book of Daniel. That is Daniel chapters 7 to 12. Now let's take this question. What is the primary focus of Daniel chapter 2? In Daniel chapter 2 verse 29 we read, As for you, O king, thoughts came upon your mind while on your bed about what will come to pass after this. And he who reveals secrets have made known to you what will be. You see clearly that Daniel chapter 2, which is one of the predictive prophecies, though in the historical section, actually deals with the objective of revealing to Nebuchadnezzar his role in the kingdom of Babylon, which the Bible says precisely is to make known to him what should come to pass hereafter. How do the prophecies of Daniel chapter 7 repeat and enlarge the prophecy of Daniel chapter 2? In Daniel chapter 7, verses 14, 18, 26, and 27, we have a clear indication of how the prophecy of Daniel 7 repeated and enlarged that of Daniel chapter 2. You see clearly in the entire book of Daniel that in the prophetic section, the principle of repeat and enlarge was employed. We're going to see this demonstrated all through this seminar. Daniel 7:14 says, Then to him was given dominion and glory and kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom, the one which shall not be destroyed. Verse 18 says, but the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom, and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. Okay? You see clearly that in the Daniel chapter 7 is a demonstration of the repeat and enlarged principle which we have in the book of Daniel. In the later models, this remains so clear. Now let's take this next question. How did the prediction of Daniel chapter 8 and 9 repeat and enlarge the vision of chapter 7? When we read Daniel chapter 8 from verse 3 to 9, and then verses 20 to 23, it says, then I lifted my eyes and saw, and there, standing beside the river, was a ram, which had 2 horns, and 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. And we see clearly here that what we have is a repeat of what we saw in Daniel chapter 7, that the images symbolized here are the ram and the goat were also a repetition of the previous symbols which we had in Daniel chapter 2 as well as Daniel chapter 7, which we are talking about nation that rose and also fell. Now let us see Daniel chapter 8 verse 3. It says, then I lifted my eyes and I saw, and there standing beside the river was a ram, which had 2 horns, and 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. And verse 4 continues, I saw the ram pushing west and north and south, so that no animal could withstand him, nor was there any that could deliver from his hand. But he did according to his will, and became very great. And as I was considering, suddenly a male goat came from the west, across the surface of the whole earth, without touching the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. Then he came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing beside the river, and ran at him with furious power. And I saw him confronting the ram. He was moved with rage against him, attacked the ram and broke his 2 horns. There was no power in the ram to withstand him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled him, and there was no one that could deliver the ram from his hand. Verse 8 continues, therefore the male goat grew very great, but when he became strong, the large horn was broken, and in place of his 4 notable ones came up toward the 4 winds of the heaven, and out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, and toward the east, and toward the glorious land. In Daniel chapter 8 verses 20 to 23 we read the meaning of all the symbols that we have just seen. So the ram which you saw having 2 horns, they are the kings of Media and Persia, and the male goat is the kingdom of Greece. The large horn which is between his eyes is the first king, and for the broken horn and the 4 that stood up in his place, 4 kingdoms shall arise out of that nation, but not with his power. And in the later time of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their fullness, a king shall arise, having fierce features, who understands sinister schemes. And this is the ram that is here demonstrated, pushing and then thereafter made by the goat that destroyed it. And this, the ram is said to represent the kingdom of Medes and Persians, and the goat is meant to represent the kingdom of Greece. This we are going to understand much later. But clearly, Daniel chapters 8 and 9 repeat and enlarge the visions of chapters 2 and 7, and simply emphasizing the attempt of the devil to do away with the religion of the people of Christ. We will get to know this much more clearly as we proceed. Now, how does the prophecy of Daniel chapters 10 to 12 summarize the preceding visions? Talking about preceding visions, we mean visions of chapter 6, chapter 2, chapter 7, chapters 8 and 9. You know, these ones were also repeated and enlarged in Daniel chapters 10 through 12. Now, Daniel chapter 10 verse 1 says, in the 3rd year of the king of Persia, that's Cyrus, a message was revealed to Daniel, whose name was called Belteshazzar. The message was true, but the appointed time was long. And he understood the message and had understanding of the vision. 14 says, now I have come to make you understand what will happen to your people in the later days, for the vision refers to many days yet to come. Further in Daniel chapter 11, verses 1 to 6, it reads, also in the 1st year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and strengthen him. And now I will tell you of the truth. Behold, the three more kings will arise in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than them all. By his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece. Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion, to do according to his will. And when he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided up toward the 4 winds of heaven, but not according to his posterity, nor according to his dominion with which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be uprooted, even for others beside these. Also the king of the south shall become strong, as well as one of his princes, and he shall gain power over him and have dominion. The dominion shall be a great dominion, and all the end of some of the years they shall join forces. For the daughter of the king of the south shall go to the king of the north to make an agreement, for she shall not retain the power of authority, neither he nor his authority shall stand, but she shall be given up with those who brought her, and with who begat her, and with who strengthened her in those times. Clearly, we see that Daniel chapters 10 through 12 summarize the preceding visions and then give us more details. The focus is to emphasize what shall befall the people in the latter days. For yet the vision is for many days. In Daniel 10:14. And the time appointed was long. Daniel 10:11 verse 1. The narrative outline of history covered in Daniel chapter 11. Leads up to later days. That is the end of time and events of the time of the end. Now, in summary, what we have said so far is the book of Daniel gives a demonstration of the principles according to which God's wisdom and power and authority operates through the history of nations for the eventual accomplishments of divine purpose. God exalted Babylon that it might fulfill his purpose. He had his period.
Lift up the trumpet and loud let it ring. Jesus is coming again. Cheer up, ye pilgrims, be joyful and sing. Jesus is coming again. Echo with hilltops, proclaim it in plains. Jesus is coming again. Coming in glory, the Lamb that was slain. Jesus is coming again. Coming again, coming again. Jesus is coming again.
I welcome you to Daniel Prophecy Module 2. The theme here is the education of Daniel and his companions as God's ambassadors in the land of Babylon. Our study in this segment will cover Daniel chapter 1, verses 1 to the end. Our key objective is to understand how divine providence brought Daniel and his companions to the land of Babylon as his ambassadors to that Gentile nation. Now, as usual, we will ask questions, then we will read the scripture, then provide answers to the questions. At what stage in the history of Judah did Nebuchadnezzar carry away Daniel and his friends as captives? The book of Daniel chapter 1 verse 1 we read, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar king of Judah, Babylon came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And further still, in 2 Kings chapter 23 verse 28 we have a further clue. It says, now the rest of the acts of Josiah and all the lands and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah? In his days, Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, went to the aid of the king of Assyria to the river Euphrates, and King Josiah went against him, and Pharaoh Necho killed him at Megiddo when he confronted him. Then his servants moved his body in a chariot from Megiddo, brought him to Jerusalem, and buried him in his own tomb. And the people of the land took Jehoahaz, the son of Josiah, anointed him and made him king in his father's place. And you see clearly that it was in the 3rd year of the reign of King Jehoiakim, that was around 604 BC. You know, he reigned from autumn 609 to 595 BC. It is notable that Jehoiakim was the second son of King Josiah. When Josiah lost his life at the Battle of Megiddo, the people made his 4th son, that is Jehoahaz, king. His father stayed, and you can see that in 1 Chronicles chapter 3, verse 15. After Jehoahaz had reigned for a period of 3 months, Pharaoh Necho of Egypt, during the summer's campaign, deposed him and placed Jehoiakim on the throne. That's what we read in 2 Kings 23, verses 29 and 30. The new king's name was changed from Eliakim, which means God raises, to Jehoiakim, it means Jehovah raises up. And he was forced to pay heavy tribute to Egypt and he seemed to be content under the Egyptian lord. Now, what items of service did Nebuchadnezzar carry away from Jerusalem's temple in fulfillment of the prophecy of Isaiah? Daniel chapter 1 verse 2 tells us that the Lord gave Jehoiakim king of Judah into his hand with some of the articles of the house of God which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God, and he brought the articles into the treasure house of his God. And in Isaiah chapter 39 verse 6, we also read, behold, the days are coming when all that is in your house and all what your father have accumulated until this day shall be carried to Babylon, nothing shall be left, says the Lord. This prophecy in Isaiah was made to King Hezekiah. You remember the story of Hezekiah? You know, how he was sick for a while. When he recovered and God prospered him, the king of Egypt came and he showed him all the secrets. And so this prophecy came, that days will come when all that is in the father's house shall be carried away to Babylon. Indeed, that visitor was the king of Babylon, and this prophecy came. Now, what we see clearly here is that the valuable and finest temples from the house of from the temple were taken away for use in the service of his god Marduk, even no less than was necessary to carry on daily rituals. So there were 3 occasions on which the Chaldeans carried away sacred vessels to Babylon. The first one was in the campaign recorded in the scripture that we have just read. Second was when Jerusalem was taken at the close of Jehoiakim's reign in 597 BC. Then the third was at the end of the reign of Zedekiah, when in 586 BC Jerusalem was taken and finally destroyed, as we can see in 2 Kings chapter 25, verses 8 to 15. Now, the spoiling of Jerusalem's treasures by Nebuchadnezzar was the fulfillment of Josiah's prophecy pronounced almost a century earlier, as we read in Isaiah 39, verse 6. And the city was burned with fire. How were Daniel and his friends selected and trained for royal service in Babylon? Daniel 1 verse 3 as well as verse 4 tells us, and we read, then the king instructed Alphenah, the master of his eunuchs, to bring some of the children of Israel and some of the king's descendants and some of the nobles, young men in whom there was no blemish, but good looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge, and quick to understand, who had ability to serve in the king's palace, whom they might teach the language and literature of the Chaldeans. So the king commanded the master of his eunuchs by name Alphenas to choose among the Israelite captives notable for their physical soundness and handsome form to stand in the king's palace. What course of learning were Daniel and his friends meant to undergo? We have seen it clearly in Daniel chapter 1, verses 3 and 4. That they were to be taught in the language and literature of the Chaldeans. And that was exactly the course that they were to undergo. That they were to be taught the learning and the tongues of the Chaldeans. You know, the term Chaldeans, it means the members of the Aramean tribe, whose early settlement was in lower Mesopotamia, who had taken over the rulership of Babylon when Nebuchadnezzar founded new Babylonian dynasty. Now the term applies also to a class of scholars at the Babylonian court who were the foremost astronomers of their day. They were equally proficient in other exact sciences such as mathematics, although they included also magic and astrology in their activities. Now the learning and tongue of the Chaldeans must have included thorough training in classical language and the script of the country of Babylon, and as well as cuneiform writings, in addition to colloquial Aramaic. What kind of diets were Daniel and his friends appointed during the course of their 3-year training? In Daniel chapter 1 verse 5, we read, "And the king appointed for them a daily provision of the king's delicacies, and of the wine which he drank, and 3 years of training for them, so that at the end of that time they might serve before the king." So they were given rations from the king's households throughout their course of 3-year duration. Of all the young men taken from Judah to the king's court, why did Daniel and his 3 friends stand out to be mentioned by name? Daniel chapter 1 verses 6 to 8 gives us a reason as to this. It says, "Now from among those of the sons of Judah were Daniel, Ananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. To them the chief of the eunuchs gave names. He gave Daniel the name Belteshazzar, to Ananiah, Shadrach, to Mishael, Meshach, to Azariah, Abednego. But Daniel proposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself." Daniel 1 verses 11 to 14 continues. Then Daniel said to the steward whom the chief of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, "Please test your servant for 10 days. Let them give us vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance be examined before you, and the appearance of the young men who eat a portion of the king's delicacies, as you see fit. So deal with your servants." So he consented with them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. You can see that there were other young men selected from the land of Judah who were also there in the court of the king. But of all these, only these 4 stood out, because they determined in their heart never to defile themselves with portions of the king's delicacies. That was why they were exceptionally pointed out by name in the scripture. It was their unwavering loyalty to God that earned them great rewards, not only in worldly affairs, but also in spiritual blessings. This is a point for us to know today. If you keep obeying God at all costs, it will surely stand out. Now, what Chaldean names were Daniel and his friends given, and what are their meanings? In Daniel 1 verse 7, we see clearly that Daniel was given the name Belteshazzar, whereas Ananiah was given Shadrach, and Mishael was given Meshach, and Azariah called Abednego. So they were given names upon adoption into the Babylonian court, just like the case of Joseph, as well as Esther. As you can see, the case of Joseph in Genesis chapter 41, but 45, he was called Zephaphaneah. And Esther, also in Esther chapter 2, verse 7, was called Hadassah. But Daniel means God is my judge. And then he was called Belteshazzar, which means Bel, protect the life of a king, or Bel, protect his life. Now, Bel refers to the chief god of the Babylonians, that is Marduk. Ananiah means Yahweh is gracious, but he was called Shadrach, the meaning of which is still inexplicable. But scholars feel that it is a corruption of the name Marduk. Michel means one who belongs to God, and was called Meshach. Again here, the satisfactory meaning of this is not yet known. Azariah means Yahweh helps, and it was called Abednego. And now it is generally agreed that Abednego means the servant of the god Nabu. How did Daniel and his friends procure permission to live according to the law of their God? Daniel chapter 1, verses 8 and 9 reads, "But Daniel proposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now God had brought Daniel into favor and goodwill of the chief of the eunuchs." So clearly you see that Daniel proposed in his heart not to defile himself with the royal diet. There are many reasons why any pious Jew would avoid eating the royal food. In the first instance, Babylonians, like any other pagan nation, ate what the Bible refers to as unclean food. And you can see more of this in Leviticus chapter 11, as well as Deuteronomy chapter 14. Further studies will give more details on this. Now, a second reason why a Jew would avoid eating royal food is that the beast that must not have been properly killed